When you're the only one inside a building after midnight, you quickly realize something. You're not really alone. Security guards see things. No one else does. Things that aren't supposed to exist. Tonight, you'll hear one story that proves some shifts never end. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe for more terrifying true-style horror stories. And remember, watch this in the dark if you dare. The empty building. The building was too big for its own good. That's the first thing Mark learned on his new job as a night shift security guard. By day, the office complex was a bustling hive of activity. Phones ringing, people in suits hurrying between meetings, elevators dinging on every floor. But by night, when the last employee left and the final lights were shut off, it transformed into something else. Something hollow. Mark's shift began at 11 p.m. and stretched until the sun came up. He was the only guard assigned that night, responsible for patrolling 4 floors, the basement parking garage, and a lobby with tall glass windows that turned into dark mirrors after midnight. At first, he didn't mind the silence. After years of warehouse jobs and overnight stocking, he was used to being awake when the world slept. The buildings hummed the faint drone of air conditioning. The occasional click of a pipe was almost comforting, but his comfort didn't last long. It started with the cameras. The security desk in the lobby held a bank of glowing monitors, each showing a different angle of the building. Hallways, stairwells, empty offices, elevators. Mark got used to watching them, scanning each one for movement. Around 1:15 a.m., he noticed something strange. One of the cameras on the 3rd floor showed a door standing open, not wide, just a crack. That wasn't unusual in itself. Sometimes a cleaning crew forgot to close something properly, or a draft pushed it ajar. But Mark had personally walked that floor less than an hour ago. Every door had been shut tight. He leaned forward, squinting at the monitor. The hallway was still. Nothing moved, but as he watched, the door slowly creaked wider. Mark sat back in his chair, frowning. "Faulty hinge," he muttered, though his voice sounded thin in the empty lobby. Still, he grabbed his flashlight and headed for the stairs. The 3rd floor was darker than the others. For some reason, the automatic lights here didn't always kick on, leaving long stretches of corridor in shadow. Mark's shoes echoed against the tile as he walked, his flashlight beam cutting across framed motivational posters and frosted glass office doors. Halfway down the hall, he saw it. The door. The same one from the monitor. It stood open, just a sliver, as though inviting him inside. Mark tightened his grip on the flashlight, pushed the door the rest of the way open, and stepped into the office. It was empty. Desks stood in neat rows, chairs pushed in, computers dark. The only sound was the low hum of the air vents. He let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding, then froze. The chair at the farthest desk swiveled. Slowly, smoothly, as though someone had just risen from it. Mark's flashlight beam jumped across the room, but there was no one there. Just the chair, gently rocking to a stop. He swallowed hard. "All right," he whispered, voice shaking. "Enough of that." He backed out of the office, pulled the door shut tight, and forced himself not to sprint down the hall. Back at the security desk, he checked the monitor again. The door was open, wider than before, and this time a figure stood in the doorway. The camera's lie, Mark stared at the monitor, his breath caught in his throat. The door on the third floor was wide open now, and in the black gap stood a figure, tall, motionless. Its shape was only a shadow, featureless against the glow of the hallway lights. He blinked hard, leaned closer to the screen. The figure didn't move, didn't sway or shift, not even the subtle tremor of someone standing too long. It was as still as a photograph. Mark rubbed his eyes. "Glitch," he muttered. "Just a damn glitch." But when he flipped to the other camera covering the same hall, the figure was there too. Same door. Same shadow. Exactly the same. A shiver ran down his spine. He'd been in that hallway minutes ago. It was empty. He told himself he'd check again, prove to himself that it was nothing. That was the job, after all, to make rounds, to confirm, to be sure. Still, his hand trembled slightly as he grabbed his flashlight and radio. The stairwell swallowed him with its echo. Every step seemed louder than usual, bouncing off the concrete walls. The third-floor door groaned as he pushed through it, into the hallway he'd walked not long before. It was empty. The office door, however, was not closed. It yawned wide open now, exposing the darkness beyond. Mark's mouth went dry. He raised the flashlight, shining it into the office. Desks. Chairs. Nothing else. But something about the air was different this time. Thicker. Colder. "Anybody in here?" His voice cracked as it left his throat, sounding smaller than he meant it to. No reply. He stepped inside anyway, heart pounding with every squeak of his shoes. The chair at the far desk was turned toward him, not rocking, not moving, just waiting. He forced a laugh that sounded more like a cough. "All right, joke's over. Whoever's screwing with the cameras, congrats, you got me." Silence. Mark backed out of the room, pulling the door shut once more. He turned quickly down the hall, eager to get back to the safety of the glowing monitors. But when he reached the stairwell, the door handle wouldn't budge. Locked. He pulled harder, rattled it, slammed his shoulder against the door. Nothing. His radio hissed suddenly at his side. "Mark?" His blood froze. The voice was faint, distorted, but it was his name. He lifted the radio to his mouth, trying to steady his shaking hands. "Control. Who is this?" Static. Then again. "Mark." He dropped the radio like it had burned him. The clatter echoed down the hall. That was when the lights above him began to flicker. One by one, day died. The hallway fell into darkness, only his flashlight cutting through the black. Mark whipped it around, breathing hard, and there at the far end of the hall stood the figure. Not a shadow on a screen this time. It was real, tall, still, facing him. Mark bolted in the other direction, sprinting down the corridor, his flashlight beam jerking wildly across the walls. He didn't know where he was going. Didn't care. He just needed distance. The hallway seemed longer than it should be, stretching impossibly far, doors blurring past on either side. His breath rasped in his throat, panic clawing at his chest. Finally, he stumbled into another stairwell. This door opened easily. Slamming shut behind him, he leaned against the cool concrete wall, gasping for air, trying to steady himself. He looked down at his flashlight, its beam trembling across the floor, and froze. His shadow stretched across the wall opposite him. But he wasn't alone. Another shadow loomed beside his, taller, thinner, and it was moving, even though Mark stood perfectly still. Locked in, Mark didn't breathe. Couldn't. His eyes locked on the wall across from him where two shadows stood side by side. His own. And the other. The taller one tilted, a jerky movement, unnatural, like a puppet tugged on invisible strings, its head angled toward him, though it had no face. Just an outline. Mark swung his flashlight wildly around the stairwell. Empty. But when the beam returned to the wall, the second shadow remained. Closer now. Mark staggered backward, nearly tripping on the steps. His breath came in ragged gasps, echoing harshly in the concrete chamber. Then the stairwell lights went out. Complete blackness swallowed him. Panic surged. Mark bolted upward, his shoes pounding against metal steps, his flashlight beam jerking wildly across the walls. Every corner of the stairwell looked the same gray, cold, endless. By the time he burst onto the fourth floor, sweat soaked through his shirt. He shoved the door open and stumbled into the corridor. The hall was lit, but wrong. Every overhead bulb glowed a sickly yellow, buzzing faintly, casting the space in warped shadows. The floor tiles gleamed as if freshly waxed, reflecting shapes that didn't quite match the objects above them. Mark forced himself forward toward the elevator bank. His only thought was escape, get to the lobby, get outside, get anywhere but here. He pressed the call button. The light blinked once. The doors slid open immediately. Inside, the elevator was dark. Too dark. Still, he stepped inside, jabbing at the button for the lobby. The doors slid shut. The descent was smooth at first. He watched the glowing numbers count down for 3, 2. Then the elevator stopped. Not at the lobby. Not anywhere. The numbers flickered and went out. The light inside buzzed faintly, then died, leaving Mark trapped in pitch black. A soft scraping sound rose from the corner. He wasn't alone. Mark's flashlight beam snapped on, his hand trembling so hard the light jittered. He swept it across the elevator. Empty. But the scraping continued. Louder now. Closer. It came from above. Mark tilted the beam upward. The ceiling panels shuddered, dust raining down. Something was moving up there, dragging itself across the metal. Then a sound that made his stomach twist, fingers tapping slowly, deliberately. Tap, 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 tap. Right above his head. No, Mark whispered, his voice breaking. No, no, no. The elevator jolted suddenly, making him stumble. The panel overhead bowed inward, as though something heavy pressed down on it. Mark slammed the emergency button. His palm slicked with sweat. Static hissed through the speaker. And then, faintly, a voice. His own Mark. His heart stopped. He dropped the radio. The overhead panel burst open. A hand, pale and impossibly long, shot down through the gap, clawing the air inches from his face. Mark screamed, shoving himself against the far wall as the elevator lights flickered violently. And then, without warning, the doors slid open. The lobby. Bright lights. Safety. He didn't hesitate. Mark stumbled out, nearly collapsing against the security desk. His lungs burned. His pulse thundered in his ears. The bank of monitors glowed steadily. Normal. Calm. He forced himself to look, and froze. Every single screen showed him Mark. Dozens of Marks, standing in every hallway, every stairwell, every room, some with their backs turned, some staring directly into the cameras, and one standing right behind him. The last shift Mark's body went rigid. On the monitors, dozens of versions of himself filled every corner of the building. Each one stood perfectly still, frozen in poses that looked too precise, too deliberate. One leaned in close to a camera, face obscured by static. Another sat slumped in the stairwell, head tilted at an unnatural angle. Several stood in rows across a hallway, as though waiting for someone to arrive, but the one that mattered most was on the central screen. It was him, standing right behind where he sat now. Mark's breath caught in his throat. Slowly, terrified of what he'd see, he turned. The lobby was empty. He whipped his head back toward the monitors still there. The figure hadn't moved, still standing inches from his chair, just beyond the reach of his vision. Not real, Mark whispered to himself. Not real, just a trick. But the air had changed again. Heavy, dense. Every sound was muffled, like he'd been plunged underwater. And then, faintly, Mark, the whisper slithered through the room. He spun, flashlight beam cutting across the empty lobby. Nothing. But on the monitors, every version of him had turned their heads all at once. Every face now stared directly at the camera. Directly at him. Mark staggered backward, panic clawing up his throat. He had to get out. Now. He rushed toward the glass doors at the front of the building. His keycard shook in his hand as he swiped it. Red light. Come on, come on. He swiped again. Red light. Again. Red. The locks wouldn't release. Behind him, the static on the monitors grew louder, hissing, building like a storm. He turned, and the lobby was no longer empty. Figures stood in the corners, their outlines tall and still. Not employees, not guards, just shapes. Some wore uniforms like his. Their faces were wrong, blurred, smudged, as though I raced. Mark stumbled backward against the locked doors, heart hammering so hard he thought his chest might burst. "Stay back," his voice cracked, raw with terror. "Stay away from me." But the figures didn't move closer. Instead, one by one, they raised their hands and pointed at him. Mark's scream tore through the lobby. The monitors went black. The building was quiet the next morning. When the day shift staff arrived, the lobby lights flickered back to normal. The desks sat neatly arranged, monitors humming softly. But the chair was empty. The logbook showed no final entry. No sign out. Mark was gone. Security would eventually replace him. Of course. They always did. The building needed a night guard. And on the cameras, late at night, in the far corners of the screen, sometimes you can still see him, standing, waiting, watching every door, forever, on his last shift. If you made it this far, you've just survived the story of a guard who never left his post. But tell me, would you dare work the night shift in a building like this? Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more terrifying true-style horror stories. And remember, next time you see a shadow on the security cameras, don't look behind you.